Hello and welcome to Viewers on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to visit China from 16th to 17th of May, and this is going to be his first foreign visit after his inauguration as the leader of Russia. Regarding this particular tour of President Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin says, let me quote, there will be an in-depth exchange of views on issues of interaction in various international organizations and structures. It is very important under the current circumstances that our partnership demonstrates it is resistant to any outside meddling, unquote. Likewise, a statement regarding this particularly important and significant visit by China's foreign ministry spokesperson, let me quote that one also. During the visit, President Xi Jinping and President Putin will exchange views on bilateral relations, cooperation in various fields, and international and regional issues of mutual interest in light of the 75th anniversary of China-Russia diplomatic relations, unquote. Also, we have seen President Vladimir Putin in his interview with the Chinese state media has backed China's peace plan for the resolution of the Ukraine conflict and has said, let me quote him also, that we commend China's approaches to resolving the crisis in Ukraine. Beijing is well aware of the root causes and the global geopolitical significance which is reflected in its 12-point plan. The ideas and the proposals contained in the document show the genuine desire of our Chinese friends to help stabilize the situation, unquote. All eyes are set on this particular important visit of President Vladimir Putin to China. At the same time, there is a statement that has come from the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg. Let me quote that particular statement. The main country that is enabling Russia to conduct its war of aggression against Ukraine in Europe is China. This particular statement is very similar in tone to already made accusations, particularly when talk about the high-ranking US officials regarding their accusations on China in providing the weapons or the lethal weapons to Russia as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned, without any solid proof or concrete evidence in that particular regard. We'll be taking the analysis regarding the significance, the timing, and what kind of a message does this particular visit of President Vladimir Putin delivers to the West in particular. We'll be taking the analysis from our esteemed panel of guests who are joining us in the studio. Mr. Zamir Ahmad Awan, Foreign Affairs Expert. Mr. Awan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Mustafa Haider, International Relations Expert. Mr. Syed, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. I'll be introducing him as he joins in. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Awan. Now, this is the first foreign visit on the part of President Vladimir Putin after taking the reins for another term in Russia. The timing and the significance of this visit going to China.
You can imagine that after becoming re-elected as the president of Russia, he decided to first country visit is the China. It is very, very important and it is very significant. As a matter of fact, during the last visit of President Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, to Russia, they had the formal talk. But when he was leaving after the talks back to Beijing, on the airport, they have some informal conversation. During that informal conversation, President Xi Jinping told President Putin that during this century, a lot of changes are going to happen, and Russia and China will navigate. They will reshape the geopolitics. So, in this context, I believe President Putin's visit to China at this particular moment, after becoming again the president for next complete one term, is very important. He is a strong man, he is a visionary leader, and he means whatever he says, and he knows what he wants to do. He is a very strong person, very strong personality, and his visit to China again to meet President Xi Jinping, who is also one of the strongest leaders in the world. China has emerged as a global power. When the two strong men will sit together, they will resolve many issues of the world.
Right, Mr. Awan, also both the countries will talk about 2022. Both the countries declared and claimed about the no limits relationship at that particular time. I would like you to shed a bit of light regarding that particular and the subsequent events happening. Also, this is going to be the 43rd meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin. There's quite a high number of meetings between the two leaders of this particular region who have got that very weight as far as the geopolitics is concerned. Both different aspects. The first one, as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned, the no limits relationship, and when it comes to the personal chemistry of the two leaders, your understanding regarding that.
As a matter of fact, both are the leader of the communist bloc. It is the single party system in China as well as in Russia. So they do not have big opposition domestically. They are in the power for long time. President Xi Jinping is for the last 15 years almost, he is elected for the third 5-year term. And President Putin is already the fifth term. So they are already in the power for a long time. So they have plenty of time to meet each other. And regarding what was your question first, please?
So the no limits relationship.
No limits.
Back, that was proclaimed back in 2022.
Yes. Actually, the Western culture or the Western society, they have a definition of relationship in the foreign affairs. That is, how much you are beneficial me and how much I will beneficial be for you. That is the interest which makes friends and the foes. But in Chinese culture, it is not the same. Sometimes they value the friendship just for the sake of friendship. And President Putin is also the man who believes in the traditional cultures and values. So China and Russia, they prefer their own traditional values, and there will be no limit mean that really there is no limit. It is not the Western concept of how much beneficial you are for me and how much I will give you and how much you will give me. There is no transactional relationship. It is no limit. That really mean the no limit. They will stand with each other in all the thicks and thins.
Right, Mr. Syed, the timing, the significance of this particular visit, the first foreign visit on the part of President Vladimir Putin is straight away goes to China.
Jawad, I think this is a very important topic firstly, and the timing is, in my opinion, less linked with his coming back into the presidency, which was expected, but is more with the fresh onslaught on Ukraine and his fresh and new offensive in the war on Ukraine. And as we have just seen that just before his announcement to go to Beijing, he has changed his Minister for Defense, and he has made an economist the Minister for Defense, Jawad Sahab. This is very significant because, and not that he's fired the other one who was
He's also accompanying during this particular visit.
He has the other previous Minister of Defense has been given another portfolio which is linked with national security, but this Minister of Defense is an economist, and experts are saying that the economy of Russia will now be centered and integrated with the war in Ukraine. It will be a war economy. So 70% of the economy will be geared towards the war offensive to sustain the war and to get dividends accordingly, integrated the supply chain with the war in Ukraine. So this is very important. And this fresh offensive that we've seen in Ukraine the past week is very critical, because we see that there is also simultaneously a visit of Blinken in Kyiv. Secretary Blinken is also in Kyiv as we speak, and I was just reading today that he was playing a rock band in Kyiv to send a message that all is good and we are here.
Right.
So, at the same time Putin is going to Beijing. So, we also see the amplification, the crystallization of big power competition. And there are two other areas, Jawad Saab. One is political, to show that the Russia-China bloc are one on Ukraine as the West increases its pressure, and to have a more coordinated effort. The second is economy, because as the war in Ukraine advances, and this is a make or break for Putin, remember that, he can't afford to go back now, it's way too late. Now it's all in, because he will lose politically, domestically, because he has stirred ultra-nationalism if he now retracts. So, he is all in now, and because of the economic situation of Russia and the world, he has to sustain the economy. He wants China to buy Russian oil, which will help the Russian economy, and to coordinate economically more on China and depend on China, because as we know, key Russian financial institutions, government organizations, key businesses have been sanctioned by the West to put pressure on Ukraine and Putin. So, politically the road is to Beijing, and economically the road is to Beijing.
Right. Mr. Awan, a very important point highlighted by Mr. Syed, the appointment of an economist as the defense minister. Do you agree what has been put forth by Mr. Syed?
I endorse Mustafa's point of view. As a matter of fact, China's rise is basically economic rise. China
through
has
soft power.
Yes, China has more focus on the economic gains, the economic developments. You know what was the China's economy in 40 years ago? The poverty rate was around 88%, and shortage of food and daily use items, and the life was very miserable. So their focus was how to uplift their own people from the poverty line and also develop their economy. Once the people, the masses, have enough food to eat, they have enough cloth to put on, they have place to live, they are happy to contribute for the national development. So that was the Chinese approach.
Right.
And of course, the Chinese model of development is a success story, and you can say as a prototype or a model for the rest of the world to follow.
So, the point which I want to understand is your understanding regarding as to what Mr. Syed has already talked about, the options at the hands of President Vladimir Putin as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned. What I could understand from your earlier take, Mr. Syed, was it was Russia's desire of perpetuating this particular conflict, to prolong this particular conflict, and appointment of an economist as the defense minister in order to get the dividends from war
decision
economy. But given the fact, now this particular interview that talks about Russia's offer of talks with the West also, right after the inauguration, the swearing-in ceremony, the inauguration address, President Putin also offered that particular option to the West at that particular time. We've already been able to discuss that in one of our shows. Now, how do you relate these two different concepts, the amplification of that particular war, or prolonging that particular war, going in the interest of Russia, given the fact the kind of offer President Putin has made to the West of dialogue and resolving the situation through peaceful means, and also backing China's 12-point peace proposal?
As a matter of fact, President Putin was always avoiding any conflict in the Ukraine, and he was giving the warning that Ukraine is my red line, don't push Ukraine to join NATO. He has observed a lot of patience and restraints, but finally when the West has insisted that NATO expansion, then he have to attack Ukraine. But initially they declared only a limited military strikes. It is a military operation, very brief and short, and maybe they plan only have little bit a few days and then come back. They have not planned for the prolonged war.
Okay.
But NATO has prolonged the war, and it seems that the NATO or the American wanted to prolong the war to bleed Russia.
So that's what exactly the difference is when Mr. Mustafa Syed says about Russia having an interest of prolonging. As per your understanding, it was NATO's intervention in supply of the weapons to Ukrainians which actually led to the prolonging of this particular war, with the Russian aim at that particular time was a special military operation.
Special military operation, yes. And this is the reason why now the war is prolonged and the military expenditure are going beyond the limits. So they have changed the strategic leadership, that is the economist as a defense minister. So maybe they will address the prolonged war in Ukraine.
Right. Mr. Sayed, do you want to comment on this when during your earlier take, perpetuation of this particular conflict in the interest of Russia based on getting the dividends from war economy? Now, during his inauguration, he said it is up to the West if they want to resolve this conflict through peaceful means. Again, in this particular interview, has been published just ahead of his visit to China, that Russia stands ready for negotiations. Also saying that it is the Western elites that are stubbornly working to punish Russia. So who is actually responsible? The prolonging of this conflict favors whom in the longer run?
The prolonging of this conflict is actually in the interest of the countries and in the interest of NATO, who actually were expanding eastwards. And Russia had said, and Zamir Sahib rightfully said, that please refrain as per your commitment, as per the commitment of Secretary Baker 20 years ago, that US will not go in the orbit in the backyard of Russia, but they did. But prolonging the war is in the interest of the NATO, because it's bogging it down, it's bogging Putin down, it's draining, it's kill him with 1,000 cuts strategy. Because when a country is in massive war, they are distracted. They cannot do economic development. They cannot come back stronger. They are drained. It's called war fatigue. And their economy is devoted to it. Their political direction is devoted to it. Their attention is diverted. And their resources are diverted. So I think that is part of the strategy. But also, Jawad Sahib, in my opinion, Ukraine is a proxy. The real issue is with the West. Ukraine is being propped up by the West. It's actually Washington. Let me be very candid, sir. It's actually Washington. Putin is not fighting Zelensky. Who is Zelensky, Jawad Sahib? He is neither here nor there. It is the West. And Zelensky is just a proxy. And the audience for the Ukraine invasion by Russia or the war in Ukraine is not Ukrainians. It's Russians. That Putin has said, I will restore the glory of the great Soviet empire, which crumbled into pieces when the Soviet Union broke up at the end of the Cold War. Okay. And just let me complete.
Please,
and the other thing is, the audience is the West. One is domestic political consumption of Russians. The second is the West, that if you mess with me, I will not be subject to your intervention and hegemony in my turf. I will resist, and you will not be allowed to cross this red line. So this is the message and the signaling to the West that we will fight back, and that Russia is finding its rightful place in the world again, bouncing back. So this is I think a shared, Zamir Sahib, you will agree, of President Xi's and Putin's, whether it's Taiwan with Xi Jinping and whether it's Ukraine with Putin, it's reunification. And if it's not peaceful, then other means will be excised.
But what does the US get when we specifically talk about propping up Ukraine against its immediate neighbor?
Because sir, if you read the national security...
What does the US get with the expansion of NATO when they target Ukraine in particular?
When you read the national security strategy of the United States, it lists two major adversaries. One is Russia, the second is China. They want to bog it down. And they are doing the same with China. They are arming Taiwan. If you just take out the military arms sales that the US has sold to Taiwan, even though they don't recognize Taiwan as a separate country. They subscribe to the one China, two systems policy, but they have through different mechanisms been selling military arms to Taiwan and arming up Taiwan. Now Taiwan doesn't matter in the world. It's not a relevant player, but it's a proxy. Same is the policy in with Russia, proxy. So, this is the, so don't get involved yourself, focus on your economy, focus on your military, save and preserve your military, but proper proxies.
Right.
And we were also, as you know, back in the day a proxy when we fought the Soviets in the Afghan jihad. So, this is the policy of
I mean, do you think the situation is going to be the same if there is going to be a change in administration and a new administration comes in place in
Excellent
the US
question.
after the elections?
Brilliant question, Jawad sir. I think that there will be a change in policy because Trump is an outsider of the US establishment. He is not part of the US establishment. That is why they are trying to bog him down with cases, this and that, stop him from participating in elections, because he is an outsider. You see, he has openly criticized the CIA, FBI, etc. And if you remember, sir, Russia is a very small thing. The biggest axis of evil they see is North Korea. You remember when Trump had a burger in Burger King, I think, or was it fried chicken in a cafe with the leader of a North Korean leader. And when Xi Jinping and his wife went to Mar-a-Lago in Florida to Trump's hotel, so what did he do? His grandchildren, Ivanka Trump's kids came and they started singing in Chinese. Yes. So he's a businessman. So I definitely think that policies of the US all around the world, including Russia, will change.
Okay, so your understanding regarding, is there going to be a change,
Definitely.
a major shift as far as the US policy towards Ukraine conflict in particular is concerned?
Definitely.
And what could be the manifestation of completely backing away, taking away the support to Ukraine?
It will be completely different policy. If President Biden win the election and he becomes the president for the next 4 years, he will continue the same policy, maybe in the more harder approach to the Ukraine issue. So there will be more conflict and more wars around the world. And if
there would be more wars.
Yes, more wars.
A hard conflict.
Hard conflicts.
No backing away.
No backing away, because Biden has the Cold War mentality. He cannot live without wars. And
what if Trump comes into power?
if Trump comes, he has a different approach, completely different approach. He has agreed to withdraw from the Afghanistan. He was asking to end the wars and some of the military bases unnecessarily, and he was against the wars. And I believe if Trump becomes the president of the United States in this election, Ukraine issue will be solved very easily.
I agree with Zamir.
No, would it be solved, or would Ukrainians be left at their own mercy? And US would be backing away. We saw the kind of hasty withdrawal in Afghanistan's case also, the kind of dire humanitarian and economic situation the people after the international troops withdrawal were faced with. Now, that international troops withdrawal in Afghanistan leading to that dire humanitarian crisis. Now, if former President Trump comes back into power again and he ends the war or support of the US towards Ukraine,
with permission of Zamir Sahab, there is a little bit of a difference. There were troops on the ground in Afghanistan. There are no US troops on the ground in Ukraine.
Okay, but the kind of...
Yes,
only the intervention and engagement with Ukraine the US has is they are arming them.
Yes,
they are supplying weapons.
Okay.
What I believe,
so, but
it will be settled.
After this time of the conflict that has gone over 2 years now, what is going to be the picture of Ukraine after there comes no more support from the Western allies?
If
that's what I want to understand.
Sir, in my opinion, if Zamir you look at President Trump's previous policies, he withdrew from multilateral partnerships.
Yes,
he said we need to focus on the US. We want to build up, we want to make America great again. What does that mean? His slogan, we want to make is give Americans jobs, economy.
Yes.
Focus on internal development and situation rather than external. So we saw him withdrawing from the Human Rights Council of the UN. We saw him withdrawing from even in his engagement from NATO. He said we are paying more than all the other NATO members. So we saw him withdrawing from international partnerships. So I don't see him seeing the Ukraine offensive and supporting Ukraine as a huge #1 priority, in my opinion. I see him focusing on US economy and building bridges instead of continuing with this Cold War mentality.
So what is going to be the impact of that particular shift in policy with the new administration in place for the Ukrainians,
I think that
who've been propped up earlier by the US administration, a different one?
I think that the immense and excessive engagement within the Russia-Ukraine war that the US has, and the US is a party in the
Yes, it's
war.
a party.
It's a party in the war,
It's a
you see. So I don't think the US will remain a party like it is right now, because it can't afford to. And also you talked about chemistry between Xi Jinping and Putin.
How
but
much
he has,
strength
but
does
Trump and
this-
Putin chemistry is pretty good also,
Yes.
by the way, if you don't
Yes,
forget. Putin-Trump chemistry is
Your
very good.
understanding regarding, I was about to come to that particular point to take your understanding. How much strength the personality or the chemistry between these two leaders actually bring to the bilateral relationship between Russia
Putin and
China?
China.
Yes, the 43rd meeting, quite a higher number of meetings between the top-ranking officials.
Sir,
of the
in
two
your
countries.
introduction, you very correctly pointed out, and you always do a lot of homework before your show, Jawad,
Thank
I
you very
admire
much.
that. You talked about the limitless partnership. I think, Zamir Sahib, correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong,
yes.
because you are an expert on China. This is the only partnership that China has stated as limitless.
Limitless.
Because China is foreign policy, and foreign policy makers are very careful with their words.
For the words, yes.
Going back to the same point again,
So it's
No.
unconditional.
it's unconditional.
Because they
there are
see
no limits to
in the
it.
geopolitical big power competition which is happening in the world.
In
Russia
that,
and China
in
are
that
now
equation, the weight of the balance goes which side? This no limit partnership or that collective West?
I want to quote one
which
thing.
is
Your
mightier.
answer, sir, is in this. Sir, today you might have seen it. Very interesting statement by the current foreign minister of India, Jai Shankar.
Yes.
And India, as you know, is part of the Quad.
God, yes.
It's an ally of the US.
Yes.
Even though it
Major
has
defense
excised,
partner.
even though it has excised neutrality in Ukraine and has played its cards well.
Abstained from the vote.
Ji, sir. He has said yesterday, I believe, that the dominance, quote unquote, sir, the dominance of the US that happened at the post-Cold War is now effectively coming to an end.
And yes.
This is from the foreign minister of India, the
Who is a close
so-called
ally of-
largest democracy,
Yes.
who is hand in glove with Washington. This is his statement yesterday. So your answer lies in the statement by the
In the
US
light of
side.
that particular statement, a quick remark on that. What's going to be the impact on the US-India relations of that particular statement?
Sir, the doctrine of necessity stands.
Yes.
They
that is
need
the Western
India
approach.
for China, to counter China.
Yes, yes.
And this statement has come because US said we can consider sanctions because of the India-Iran Chabahar cooperation. So India is saying, stay
somewhere
within
it is
your
over.
parameters. You are no longer the global policeman that you were. We will engage with you, but we will exercise strategic autonomy as well. And I think as a rising country, they have played their cards well.
Yes.
Does that have to do anything with the findings of the US authorities in particular, keeping aside Canada for a moment, with that assassination attempt
Yes, the
on
Indian
a
highway
Canadian?
overseas.
So that's
on-
Canadian.
No, no,
Canadian.
no,
They have
no.
a-
There were
America
the
too.
findings on the part
But
of
the
the
US
US
didn't take any
officials.
punitive measures towards India.
Right.
They actually brushed it under the carpet.
But
Canada played it up.
they played
Trudeau
it up.
played it
The reaction of both the countries had been quite different. As far as there was a more of a reaction on the part of the Canadians as compared to the
Yes.
US side. But with the publication of two different reports in the Guardian and the Washington Post
Yes.
also, I mean, does this particular statement of Jay Shankar has to do with the US exposing India's face of transnational terrorism also?
I think that the US has not, I wouldn't go on to say that the US has exposed India's face of transnationalism.
They did.
I would say
but in
that
a mild way.
I would say that because, you know, US has very strong institutional mechanisms.
Later on, there were statements by the White House
Yes.
also, other quite high-ranking officials
I think-
regarding India's assassination attempt.
The
Yes.
larger thing, sir, comes back to Russia-Ukraine. The US is not happy with India's neutral
neutral
stance
stance, yes.
when it comes to Ukraine. it has been slightly pro-Russia, neutral plus, as they say. It has been neutral but pro-Russia, their stance when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, and we see that it's been a core issue for the US, and its key ally, whom they consider India, has exercised neutrality. So I think they are taking out the frustration and anger of that here.
Right. Mr. Awan, now looking at this particular statement when President Putin commends China's approaches in resolving the crisis in Ukraine, saying that the proposals, when we talk about those 12-point peace proposal that was put forth by Chinese authorities back in 2023, the ideas and the proposals contained in the document show the genuine desire of our Chinese friends to help stabilize the situation. Given the fact there is no limits partnership already proclaimed, the timing of this particular statement backing China's plan for the resolution of Ukraine conflict, what does that actually signify?
As a matter of fact, China has good relation with Ukraine as well. Of course, they have the very close relation emerged with Russia, but they don't want to lose the Ukrainian also. So they want to end the war. They want to resolve the issue peacefully, amicably. And go back to the original question that if President Trump comes to the power and US support ends to the Ukrainian, there will be a negotiated peace settlement of Ukraine issue. The territories which Russia has already occupied is majority Russian speaking or Russian ethnic people.
I think they will be part of the settlement. They'll say now Russia keeps this.
Russia will keep them, or they will make this autonomous region as a buffer state, and there will be a written agreement that Ukraine will never ever involve with the NATO, and Europe will support this agreement.
But in addition to what Zamir Sahib has said, if I, with your permission, sir, if I just add this point, that we've seen the role of China to be a very positive role of that of a healing touch.
The peacemaker.
Peacemaker. Yes. You look at the Iran-Saudi rapprochement.
Yes.
Now I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Ukraine-Russia rapprochement brokered by Washington, by Beijing.
There are chances that China will play a positive role.
Because they don't have excess baggage. They are not seen as a colonial power. They are not seen as a hegemon. They are not seen as a party. China has not been a party in any conflict.
Even
if you look at the past
China
decades.
is willing to play a role in Middle East, Israel and Palestine.
What about this particular statement, Mr. Awan? Now, the war in Ukraine demonstrates that the security is not regional, security is global. The main country that is enabling Russia to control its war of aggression against Ukraine in Europe is China. It's a direct finger pointing on the part of NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg, pretty much similar in tone with the statements that have come from the top-ranking officials in Washington also.
Yes, but
without any
allegations and it has no value. Actually, many European countries are willing to ask China to play a positive role. Even that Secretary Blinken was in Beijing just last month at requesting China to end the war in Ukraine. I mean, they are saying something and doing something.
Correct.
No, asking China to end the war in Ukraine in the context of their own understanding that it was right at the outset of this particular conflict. We saw the US officials blaming China for providing the lethal weapons to Russia.
Allegations.
And that made Russia to have that sustainability of fighting this particular war.
I think the US doesn't have any moral authority to lecture on providing lethal weapons, because they are providing lethal weapons to Israel in the genocide against peaceful and civilians and women and children.
That is exactly the point that I just want you to shed a little bit more light on, because on one side it accuses China, which provides the peace proposal for the resolution of the conflict, at the same time providing continuous around, if I'm not wrong, until now it's been over $200 billion of aid to Ukraine alone, and now the recent signing by President Joe Biden of that $91 billion foreign aid package,
which is mostly
military aid.
Yeah, 61 going to Ukraine.
Yes.
And if you couple this with that given to Israel, it's much more long. I want to quote a New York Times story, which, sir, you will appreciate. When President Trump was in the presidency last time, in the last term, it says he called President Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, and he said, Mr. President, I want to seek your advice. China is getting ahead of us. What should I do? And Jimmy Carter says, since 1979, which was the last war of China with Vietnam at that time, that was the last war of China, limited war.
Yes.
That was the last time China fought a war in 1979, and he said since then China has been focusing on economic growth internally, and he said since then, and this is Jimmy Carter, this is not Zamir, Awan or Mustafa Haider or some China, this is Jimmy Carter, former president of the US, saying, and since then President Trump, we the US have been at war.
Continues at war.
So that sums it up. Hard power versus soft power.
When we talk about bringing new tariffs to the Chinese companies and the Chinese products, don't you think it affects the US economy in return also? Doesn't it leave an impact on them also?
It will have the adverse impact on the US economy. Of course, China has a...
So doesn't that come into the calculation of the US authorities when they are putting in such type of measures in order to contain China's economy?
You know, the China has a trade surplus with almost every country of the world. So for China is a huge market, the whole world. America will suffer. American will suffer. American people will suffer. They will not have the access to the cheaper product, affordable products. I mean, they will suffer. It is a political pressure on China. It is part of the campaign to counter China, contain China, which is the rise of China. But actually, American people, public will suffer. Many American middle class people, they can't afford very expensive products. So for made in China or Chinese products, they can afford it easily. It is not to punish China, it is they are punishing their own people.
So what kind of impact on a scale could be on the US when it resorts to such type of measures towards China in particular?
I mean, there is no precise calculation with me at the moment, but definitely there will be a huge social impact.
So, Mr. Syed, doesn't this particular dimension that it may affect the US and its people in return, bringing in such measures against the Chinese companies and Chinese products, is it not going to have an effect on the US and its people? Doesn't that come into the calculation of the US authorities?
It does, and that is why if you see that the biggest lobby in US which advocates engaging with China are the US corporate sector. Boeing, Apple, Ford, General Motors. These are companies whose biggest markets are China. They thrive on the Chinese consumer economy because the Chinese have a huge purchasing power. The biggest sales of Mercedes is where? That's a German company, but I'm giving an example, is in China. So
the Boeing also, the biggest market is
Boeing, that's why I said Boeing.
Apple,
so
the biggest market is China.
The American jobs are directly linked with Chinese consumership. So that is why the US is between a rock and a very hard place, because they have to contain, they have decided to contain China geopolitically, but they are economically intertwined. And don't forget, Jawad Sahab, that the largest amount of debt that the US has is to China.
Tesla has 60% market share in China.
Yeah.
Now taking a view of the strength of economic ties between Russia and China, its weight against the collective West economy, including the US.
You see, when you talk about the collective West, I think it's very important to dissect the West, because just recently, before President Putin went to Beijing, President Xi has just returned from a Europe tour.
Exactly.
He went to France,
Serbia
and Hungary. France, of course, is part of NATO, part and parcel of NATO, part of the West.
EU.
But Serbia and Hungary are key countries, and one of them is in NATO also.
Yes, Hungary is in NATO.
Hungary is in NATO. They have decided to increase and elevate the strategic partnership. And I think with Serbia now they have listed it as all-weather strategic partnership, which is the same as Pakistan, China.
Yes,
So that is the inroads that China is making into the West. And in Budapest also, it was a very successful trip of President Xi. So I feel, and then the Jawad Sahab, the port of Paris is in Greece. Don't forget the port Gwadar. We always talk about Gwadar, but the port of Paris in Greece, Zamir Sahab, is being made by Chinese. So, and Italy till last year was part of the BRI, but they succumbed to the pressure and they left Belt and Road Initiative. China, look, China cannot be contained.
Yes.
You cannot contain a huge elephant in the room. You cannot contain it. You have to engage with it. The faster they learn about this, the better. And the current hegemony, which we have seen in the past decades, US-led hegemony of the West, I agree with the Foreign Minister of India, can no longer sustain the status quo. The reality has changed, but they are refusing to accept it. But the good part for them is that China is not a military power. They are an economic power. They do not want military adventurism. Why? Because they cannot afford to distract themselves from economic rejuvenation of the Chinese people. Their focus is the well-being of the Chinese people. It's 1.4 billion people, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Awan, one last question. So what is expected? What could likely be transpiring of this particular engagement between President Xi Jinping during this particular tour and President Putin?
Economically, they will be more close, and politically, they will be on the same page, and they will play a joint role in the geopolitics, including Ukraine and the Middle East. And I believe that after this visit, there will be more cooperation between Russia and China.
So specifically dealing with the Western sanctions.
Of course.
What are the options? How can the Chinese go about it and the Russians?
Chinese has neutralized all the sanctions against Russia.
Yes.
They are doing the full trade, even the enhanced trade with Russia. The Russian economy has not suffered anything.
Mr. Sayyed, your quick last comments regarding what could be expected out of this important interaction between President Xi Jinping and President Putin?
We will see a reinforcement of the Russia-China axis of the global South versus the bloc politics and the Cold War mentality of the West. And we see that the reinforcement and coordination in economic cooperation and political cooperation of Russia-China. So we see a Russia-China-led world order on one side, and a declining US-led world on the other side.
So what is the message being delivered? I mean, is it exactly that is manifested from this statement that has come from NATO's chief, Jens Stoltenberg?
We see, sir, an increased and escalated big power competition that is making the world a less safer place, in my opinion.
Yes.
So the manifestation of it is going to be likely what?
More proxy wars.
More proxy
wars. Ukraine is one example. I feel there will be others.
Mr. Mustafa Haider, the international relations expert, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Zamir Ahmad Awan, foreign affairs expert, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.